What is the last day? What is that day where the sun, the moon, and the stars will no longer give their light? The purpose of this lesson is to look at what the Bible means when it talks about the last day. And we're going to find that the last day is a general resurrection of all people who ever lived, all the dead and the living. And God's people will be raised into a spiritual body for everlasting life, and the unsaved will be raised for judgment day and everlasting destruction. But another thing that we see throughout the Bible, and especially in prophets and passages about prophecy, is that right at the end, the sun will be darkened, the moon will become like blood or darkened, and the stars will not give their light. And we wonder that very odd passage, and why in the world would the sun not give light and the stars? And we're going to find that that's why it's called the last day, is that there's no more need for the sun, the moon, and the stars. And we're going to find out very clearly why. Please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel if you enjoy these videos. We may recall we just completed a Millennium series. And the millennium is a symbol for the church age. It's a time when Satan was bound. The gospel exploded into the world. In the early church and through the following 2,000 years, the Bible became very prevalent. Many people in this world associate themselves with Christianity. The first resurrection was the salvation of God's people, being born again, being raised to walk in newness of life. And we see in John 5 that the general resurrection that will occur on the last day. And here in John 5, it talks about and the hour is coming, the last hour and the last day, in which all that are in the graves shall hear his voice, and shall come forth, they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, those are Christians, God's people, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. We see that the last day, that description, which we're going to look at verses that include that in a moment, there's many other descriptions in the Bible that refer to the same time. The last day, the day of the Lord, the day of God, the day of Christ, Judgment Day, Day of Wrath, Day of Clouds, Day of Trumpet and Alarm. There's actually 26 days here listed on this slide that all refer to that same type. And they're talked about differently, but they just explain different aspects or different symbols representing the last day. Okay, so here we see the last day is recorded in John chapter 6. And let's read this passage from John 6. And this is the Father's will which has sent me, that of all which he has given me I should lose nothing, but shall raise it up again at the last day. At the last day, Christ will raise up his people. And this is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which sees the Son and believes on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at that last day. No one can come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. We see 3 times in John 6 where Jesus promises on the last day that he will raise his people up. And we see also in John 11, Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. That's the day of resurrection, the last day where God's people will be raised. But we also see in John 12 that the last day is also the day of judgment. We see he that rejects me and receives not my words has one that judges him. The word that I've spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. So the last day is not only a day of salvation and a day of resurrection for God's people, it's a day of judgment and a day of entry into everlasting destruction. Okay, we also see that the day of judgment is the same as the day of the Lord. Recall that slide we just looked at with 26 representations of a day, being the day of the Lord, day of judgment, day of trouble. The day of judgment we read in 2 Peter 3:7, but the heavens and the earth which are now by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. In 2 Peter 3:7 we see the day of judgment is a day of fire and a day of perdition and damnation. And we also see, though, in just a few verses later in 2 Peter 3, that the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. It's talking about this day of judgment, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. So we see that these days all align. The last day is the day of judgment, but it's also the day of the Lord. Moving on, we'll see that the sun, the moon, and the stars will be darkened. It's a spiritual portrait of the last day. It's the fact that at the last day is the last day. There's no more need for the sun, the moon, and the stars. And we're going to find out why in a moment. We see, for example, in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24:29, the sun, and this is immediately after the tribulation of those days, immediately after the Great Tribulation, and we know what happens then, is that that's the return of Christ. And we find that the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven. There's no more need for the sun, the moon, and the stars, the light that we get from those objects, because Jesus Christ is the light. Revelation 6, this is the sixth seal, which refers to Judgment Day. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair. The moon became as blood. The stars of heaven fell into the earth. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it's rolled together. And in the larger context, this is, again, a picture of Judgment Day. It's the last day. Isaiah 13:10, the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not cause their light to shine. One more testimony, and this is, in the Judgment Days talked about extensively in the Old Testament. This is an example from Isaiah 13. But we see that the loss of the sun, the moon, and the stars is replaced by the glorious light of Jesus Christ. And let's read a few verses on that. Then the moon shall be confounded and the sun ashamed, when the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem and before his ancients gloriously. It's the Lord of hosts. It's Jesus Christ that will replace the light. Isaiah 60, the sun shall be no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee, but the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and thy God thy glory. It's God, it's Jesus Christ that is the light of eternity. Once this creation is done and there's a new heavens and a new earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars will all be darkened. They'll all be rolled up like a scroll. And we're going to look to Jesus Christ as our light of eternity. Finally, Revelation 21, and the city had no need of sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it. And this is describing the New Jerusalem after the return of Christ. And this is the new heavens, new earth, and the New Jerusalem. For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Notice in Revelation 21 again, the city has no need of sun, neither of the moon to shine for in it. It's Jesus Christ that is our light. Okay, just a quick summary. So the purpose of this lesson was to look at what is the last day. And we saw clearly from John 6, 11, and 12 that the last day is the resurrection of God's people to everlasting life. And it's the resurrection of others that are not God's people to everlasting judgment and damnation. And we also saw that when the prophets talk about the sun, the moon, and the stars not giving their light anymore and being rolled up like a scroll, that means there's a new heavens and a new earth. It's because of the glorious, great news of eternity that Jesus Christ, God, is the light that's the only light that we'll need. Please subscribe to this YouTube video channel if you find these lessons helpful. And thank you very much for tuning in and listening to this video.